Welcome to our second webinar on online abuse in sport. And this will be a monthly webinar that we'll do. My name is Dr. Gary Sinclair. So this webinar is presented jointly by the FIA, DCU, and the United Against Online Abuse Coalition. So we have an exciting lineup of speakers over the next few months. For example, next month we have Dr. Kim Toffeletti from Deakin University, who will be presenting her work on online harms in Australian sport. So watch out for announcements concerning other speakers in this space as well. So our speaker today is a very special guest. Professor Adrien Bouchet from the University of Central Florida is going to speak about the history of the TIDES reports. So the TIDES reports are the Institute, or TIDES is the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport. He's going to speak about its relationship with online abuse and sport, including specific points in time over the last 30 years that have been influential in attracting attention to these issues. So Professor Bouchet is the Richard and Helen DeVos Foundation Endowed Chair and eminent scholar of the DeVos Sports Business Management Program. He's also the director of TIDES. He's a distinguished scholar that has served several distinguished roles, including a Fulbright scholarship. He's received research awards and published a lot of work, very influential work in many of the major outlets in the business and management field. So prior to entering academia, he served as a manager, marketing partnerships for the Miami Dolphins, a senior manager for marketing partnerships for the Miami Marlins. He was the senior director, team, league, and venue services for the SFX/Clear Channel Entertainment, which is now known as Live Nation, probably a better name now, and the associate general manager of ISP Learfield College Sports. So how we work these hours is essentially we'll give over the floor to our speaker, who will present her work, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. So Adrien, thanks so much. I was saying good afternoon, but I suppose it's good morning to you. Thanks for doing the talk.
So Gary, thank you for having me. I'm always appreciative to talk about my research. I have visited DCU back in the summer of 2022. I was friends with, and still am friends with, Theo Lynn. I came from the University of Tulsa, where I was on the faculty for about 12 years, and DCU had a relationship with the University of Tulsa. I believe we just have had some visitors over there fairly recently from Tulsa. I took the job at the University of Central Florida in the DeVos Sport Business Management Program exactly 2 years ago. I replaced a man named Richard Lapchick, who probably doesn't need much introductions in terms of social justice in sport. He was the leading voice of social justice initiatives. He led the apartheid movement or the anti-apartheid movement from a sports perspective in the 1970s. He took over the University of Central Florida DeVos Sport Business Program in 2000. The TIDES reports are his reports. And what I'll do today is, when we're talking about the TIDES reports, I'll kind of break it down into the beginning of the TIDES reports and sort of the evolution of what we call the race and gender report card. We'll talk about sort of the key moments in time over the last 30 to 35 years that have kept the TIDES reports front and center with the professional sports leagues in the United States, and most importantly with the media in the United States. I'll talk a little bit about how the leagues use the TIDES reports to their benefit. I'll talk a little bit about the evolution of the league's attitudes towards the reports. They did not start out very favorably. This was not something the leagues wanted to shine a light on back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, but their attitude has really switched over the last 30 to 35 years. And then we'll talk about what is the future of the TIDES reports? What is sort of the next generation of TIDES reports? What should we be looking at in the future Race and gender have been the focus the last 20 years, but what does the future look like? So let's go back to the beginning. The Tides reports have their start in a book that Dr. Richard Lapchick wrote in 1988 when he was a faculty member at Northeastern University in Boston. He wrote a book about race in sports. The editor of the book suggested that he include a chapter on what the professional sports leagues are doing as it relates to racial hiring. Gender did not come until a little bit later. At first, it was just a race report. So the book was reviewed. The book had some pretty scathing reviews, one of them from Sports Illustrated. The review in Sports Illustrated, which is a pretty popular worldwide magazine, certainly was back in 1988. And the guy that wrote the review said, why is Dr. Richard Lapchick, why is he bringing up race? We all know that racism is over with. It's just not a thing anymore, and he should stop writing about it. So that kind of spurred the start of the race and gender reports. Dr. Lapchick took it from a chapter in a book in 1988 and made it kind of an annual report card on the professional sports leagues. And at first, that was Major League Baseball, the National Basketball Association, and the NFL. I'm going to use the term professional sports leagues. I'm including major college sports when I say professional sports leagues, because in the United States, what we call Division I university sports is really played as a for-profit commercial enterprise, and the colleges play a strong role in the Tides reports as well. So when he first went to the leagues in the late 1980s and early 1990s about doing a Tides report, where he was going to sort of judge their success in hiring African-American coaches and executives, needless to say, the leagues did not necessarily embrace that, mainly because they had not done a very good job of it. Nobody had certainly ever challenged them on it. And all of a sudden, here was this professor from Northeastern University that had this worldwide reputation as a social justice activist saying all of a sudden, we're going to start measuring you and we're going to do it annually. So they started doing the reports. The leagues over time have become much more willing to work with us. It is now a partnership between the DeVos Sport Business Management Program and the leagues in terms of putting out these reports. It is a cooperative relationship. It didn't start out by that. It started out with all these teams put out press releases and press guides, these little magazines that would have all the pictures of the coaches and the executives in it, and it would have the schedule for the next year and all this. And when the Tides report card was first being put together, Dr. Lapchick would have all his grad assistants write all the teams in the leagues for their press releases, and you would just go through the books, just counting the number of African American coaches and executives, and then they would take that data, put that data together, and issue a report. Okay, that was the first 10 years of the report. That's the way that things were handled. So this was not any kind of sophisticated operation at first. But eventually a deal was struck with the leagues. And the deal was that the leagues would supply the data. Now, by federal law in the United States, they have to keep track of the hiring of minorities. So the leagues would supply the data to Dr. Lapchick and a team of graduate assistants. By then, Dr. Lapchick had moved from Northeastern University down to the University of Central Florida. The leagues would supply the data if the report was done from a league-wide initiative, okay? So we don't do individual team report cards. So when you're looking at, just to use the NBA, for example, we get all 32 teams and we aggregate the data. So we don't sit there and call out teams. That's not the job of the report card, to say, hey, the Los Angeles Lakers are doing a great job, but the New York Knicks are not. The data is aggregated. The reports are much more sophisticated now, but the focus is on how the league is doing as a whole, not the teams. And that is the deal we struck with the individual leagues. That was how it had to happen because the report cards really took off. And when I say took off, when he first started in 1988, it was simply a review of how three leagues were doing: Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NFL. Now we do report cards for almost every single professional sports league in North America. I shouldn't say North America, none of the Mexican leagues, but the US and Canada. There's two separate report cards. We do a public report card. When we say public, that means that data is released to the public, and we do a private report card. Some of the leagues come to us, and I say the leagues, maybe I should use the term sport properties, because some of the auto racing leagues, the U.S. Olympic Committee, some of the sport properties come to us and say, look, we're not ready to release this data publicly. We want you to do a report card for us because we do really want to measure how we're doing. We want you to come in and grade us. We want you to come and give us helpful advice on how we can grow our race and gender composite in our executives and our coaches, but we're not ready to release that data to the public. That is fine. We do private report cards as well. We probably put out between 14 and 16 report cards a year. Of those 14 or 16, probably 10 or 12 of them are public. When I say public, anybody can go to the Tide's website, and I'll supply that, and view the report cards. You can go all the way back to the early, maybe to the mid 90s. Unfortunately, we didn't really keep great data we didn't keep the report cards from the early 90s, but we do have the history of the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA. So that was sort of the beginning of it. You can't really talk about the Tides reports without talking about the NBA, the National Basketball Association. The NBA, out of all the leagues, the NBA has been by far the most progressive in adopting the Tides report cards, supplying us with data, and really buying into the fact that they would like to have African Americans and females in coaching positions and executive leadership positions within the league and within the teams. So David Stern, who was the longtime commissioner of the NBA and really brought the NBA into the forefront in the 1980s and 90s and 2000s, he was a huge proponent of the report cards, and that helped enormously. And we'll get to the role that he played in just a little bit. So he once said that the goal is not that you will notice when we hire somebody who's black, but that you will not notice when we fire somebody who's black. So if you look at that quote, I think you can say that we've reached that time in place, at least in the U.S. professional sports leagues, where the NBA fires plenty of African American coaches every year, and nobody really makes a big deal about it. So we've reached what he thought was the pinnacle of the report cards. So again, the first 10 years of the report cards, it was a race report card. It became a race and gender report card in the late 1990s when we started looking at female participation with these sport properties. Okay. So Tides moved to University of Central Florida in 2001. The DeVos Foundation, which is a heavily funded foundation in the United States from the DeVos family, they support it. When I say they support it, they pay for the University of Central Florida to have a world-class master's degree in sport business management. And it is our students that work on the Tides reports while they are getting their master's degree. So we could not do that without the support of the foundation. We certainly could not do that without the support of the graduate assistantships, which allow us to operate. So there's been some key moments in the Tides reports that we need to discuss. One of them happened early on in the history of the report in 1988. There was a a man named Al Campanis, who was the general manager or associate general manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers of Major League Baseball. So one of the most high profile executives in sports. He had played Major League Baseball. He made a comment on national television one night that, quote, blacks might not have the necessities to become coaches and to become executives in Major League Baseball. So that put race at the forefront of sport in the United States. So if you'll notice during the 35 years of Tides, there's been points in time where something has happened at these professional sports leagues where the subject of race goes to the forefront, and that helped kick it off. I said that the Tides Report started in 1988. Al Campanis made this quote in 1988. He was immediately fired by the Los Angeles Dodgers. But again, it put race in the forefront of talking about sports, and it happened on national television. So this was a big deal, and it allowed Tides to kind of get a jump start on the reports. There's been two other points in time. One of them was a guy named John Calipari, who is still a very successful college basketball coach in the United States. He was coaching in the NBA, the National Basketball Association. In 1993, he made a derogatory comment about Mexicans after an NBA game at an NBA game post-game press conference. And David Stern, who I told you was really David Stern, who was the commissioner of the NBA, he wanted to immediately fine him, which is how they usually do things in the United States. When somebody messes up, you get hit with a large fine. But since these coaches and players make a lot of money, the fine might not be really as might not really correct behavior as much as you might think. So David Stern called Dr. Richard Lapchick and said, "Hey, what do you think the number is? How much money should we fine him?" And Dr. Lapchick said, "I don't think you should fine him anything. I think what you should do is mandate that everyone employed in the NBA go through diversity training." And that was really the start of the NBA really adopting a diversity initiative. So the NBA league office, including David Stern, who was the commissioner, they hired Dr. Lapchick to come up there and put on an 8-day seminar in which was mandatory for everybody in the league office to go through this diversity training. And that really, once again, that really gave the Tides Reports a different level of publicity. And the third thing that happened was Donald Sterling, who was the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers. I don't know, maybe in 2000, 2005, 2007, sometime around that time frame, he made a derogatory comment about African American players in the NBA. It was caught on video or on audio. This David Stern had retired from the NBA, and Adam Silver had become the commissioner, and this was kind of one of his first tests of his commissionership, what he was going to do about this. He promptly stood up and basically said, "We are going to vote that Donald Sterling be removed from the NBA as an owner." They forced Donald Sterling to sell his stake in the Los Angeles Clippers. Again, this was on national news, not just sport related. It was on national news in the United States and Canada for about a solid week or two. And again, it kept the Tides Reports alive and well. So all these weren't necessarily Tides related, but they did keep the issue of race and professional sports in the United States constantly at the forefront, which again increased the publicity of the Tides Reports. The whole thing would not work. Two things the Tides Reports do, or there's two things that really help us be successful. One of them is we have access to the leagues, where the leagues feel that they are going to get a fair shake in what is really a report card. And it doesn't necessarily have to work well for the leagues. There's been plenty of times when we've given the leagues failing grades. All the leagues have embraced this to a certain extent, some better than others. I told you the NBA has been the best. The one that has probably come the furthest in terms of starting initiatives to increase race and gender hiring has been the National Football League, which might come as a shock to some people. It usually seems to when I say that. But the NFL has come the furthest, I would say. But again, the leagues cooperate with us. It's a trust relationship. Again, we're in our, I don't know, the 35th year of the report. Dr. Lapchick retired 2 years ago, handed the reports off to me to kind of continue these reports on. We'll talk about that a little later. But if cooperation from the sports leagues has really been one of the keys, the other key has been media attention. The report cards get a lot of media attention. You could almost make the case, and plenty of people do, that the reason these leagues cooperate is because the reports get so much media attention they can't not cooperate. So the subject of race and gender hiring is always in the forefront in the United States. The leagues cooperate. The media embraces the reports. We give exclusivity to two outlets, ESPN and the AP, which is the Associated Press. Those two outlets get the reports 24 hours before we release it to the general media. ESPN gives us space on ESPN.com to write up an article every time we release one of the report cards about the major sports leagues. And the AP was one of the first media outlets to embrace it back in the late 80s and early 90s. Okay, so so again, the media embraces it, the leagues cooperate with us. That's what makes it work. The other thing is it gets a lot of academic attention. It gets a lot of academic sites. Academics, and I'm one, academics tend to wish that we would drill down to the team level, or as we call it in the business school, the firm level. We don't do that. That's just not the agreement we have. It would make their lives easier, and it would make their data better, they think. But again, the agreement we have with the leagues is it stays aggregated at the league level. But it does get a lot of citations. You can go to Google Scholar and pull up my Google Scholar, pull up Richard Lapchick's Google Scholar, and you can see where the Tides reports have been cited tens of thousands of times over the last 35 years. So that's sort of the beginning of it, took you through a little bit of history of it. Let me sort of pivot now and talk a little bit about how it works, because the way I just described it, everything is rosy, it works easy, and in reality, it's anything but easy. Any academic who's worked with data knows that data is messy. So typically how the Tides reports work are we reach out to the leagues 4 months before the release date. The release date is always scheduled for a point in time where there's going to be the most media attention. And what I mean is we release the NCAA, which is the governing body of college athletics, the Division I basketball reports on the eve of March Madness, which is the big basketball tournament in March. We release the Major League Baseball reports on April 15th, which is the anniversary of Jackie Robinson, the first Black athlete to play in Major League Baseball. So we always try to time the reports to get the most media attention. So about 4 months, we work backwards. About 4 months prior to that, we will reach out for the leagues. We'll ask them to supply the data. We will get the data. Sometimes the data doesn't come in the form it needs to. You got to remember, you're asking these leagues, you're really creating work for the leagues to have to do this, to aggregate all this data. Anytime you have to do that, it's asking a lot of the leagues to cooperate like they do. But federal laws in the U.S. require the leagues to keep this kind of data on the hiring processes. We run the data. Again, we have the graduate assistants that work with us. We run the data. We write up the report. The report is pretty extensive, usually, 40 to 60 pages. That is something we will probably revisit in the next year. We'll probably make it. One of the critiques of the report is it probably needs to be a little bit more visually appealing rather than sort of a lot of verbiage. So we write up the report. Before we release it to the general public, we always show it to the leagues about a week beforehand. We show it to the leagues. We ask them, hey, is it accurate? this is the time where the leagues make their case. They always try to make the case and always try to shade the data to paint the leagues in the best light, as well they should. We've been doing this a while. We know what we can push back on, and we can say, no, here's what the data says. So we'll push back when we need to. And if we can't come to an agreement with the leagues, we'll publish the version that we have. They do not have final say over anything we publish, but we do get their thoughts on it. We'll release an embargoed copy to the media outlets, and then we'll release it to the general public. Right before it's released to the general public, I will set aside 2 hours of my day where I will meet with reporters. They are free to call me to set up a Zoom call, and we will discuss the reports, and we'll talk about what the previous reports looks at. We'll look at trends, and we'll have an executive summary of the reports as well. As I said before, the reports are covered pretty well by the United States media. There's always a report, and there's always a write-up about the reports in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal. All the main media outlets cover it, and then a lot of smaller papers cover it as well. If you write up a report about the NCAA, it's covered in the Indianapolis Star, which is where the NCAA is located in the city of Indianapolis. So that's kind of how it's done. Now, let me take just a little bit to explain what's the benefits to the leagues. Because as I discussed earlier, you're really creating a lot of work for the leagues. I mean, they have to aggregate all this data together, and there's always the chance that the data is not going to tell a very good story. So how does it benefit the leagues? It's important to realize that the league and the commissioners can't mandate the teams do anything, okay? In all the leagues, the franchises or the teams are separate franchises. They're separate business entities from the leagues. So the commissioner is not the king. He can't tell people what to do. What he can do is to sort of leverage the reports to get the change that he or she would like. And I think the leagues do a pretty good job of that, right? So look at the leagues as a true scorecard. The league executives can show the team executives, okay, here's where we rank. Here's where we ranked 5 years ago. Here's where we ranked 10 years ago. Here's us in comparison to the other professional sports leagues. And I've said throughout this talk that the NBA and the NFL really embrace this. And if those two leagues are on board with it, then all the other leagues are going to kind of fall in line, or at least that's been the history of Tides. Major League Baseball has always done a very good job of embracing it as well. So the leagues can strongly advise the teams on how to act. The leagues can mandate certain initiatives. The NFL has what's called the Rooney Rule, which has been in place probably 20 to 25 years. And the Rooney Rule basically says that when there is an opening for a head coach in the National Football League, that of the 5 people that interview, 2 of them have to be minorities. So what this does is it gives the minorities a seat at the table to interview for the head coaching jobs. And as I noted at the start, the NFL has come the furthest way in the hiring of African Americans and women in leadership positions. So we schedule a conference a couple of times or every couple of years where we get all the executives, most of the ones that are in charge of Tides. Over time, we've developed relationships with 1 or 2 or 3 people at the leagues. They will meet with us, so we know them. We schedule a conference where we get everybody in the same room, all the leagues together, and the NFL can tell Major League Baseball, here's how we benefit. The U.S. Olympic Committee can say, okay, here's how we benefit from it. They can just share ideas on how to best use the Tides reports. All the leagues seem committed to hiring African American and female executives. They all seem to have done a pretty good job, and they get good exposure, right? When this does well, like the NFL last year, or I guess this upcoming season, has 9 persons of color as head coaches in the league, by far the biggest number they've ever had. And the NFL got a lot of glowing reviews, as well they should, for having that many persons of color as head coaches in the league. So So they do get good exposure out of it. So let me take about 5 minutes, 7 minutes to kind of close on saying what's the future of the report. If you look at the Tides reports, it's kind of three different tranches, right? Tides 1.0 was the racial and gender, just the racial study that went from roughly 1988 to roughly 1999, 2000. If the race, and then it morphed into a race and gender report card, and that went from 2000 all the way up until now, 2024. What does Tides 3.0 look like? What's the future of Tides? That's something that we will sit down in the next year and try and figure out. We added females in the early 2000s. What do we need to add to make Tides and keep Tides relevant? It's interesting. Since the Tides report started, a lot of consulting companies have gotten into this business as well. So now you have some of the bigger consulting companies like Deloitte, who have their own initiatives, their own scorecards. The leagues will hire them as consultants, and they'll come in. So in a lot of ways, Tides has spurred a lot of growth in this area, but in other ways, Tides has a lot of competition in this area as well. So what does Tides 3.0 look like? Do we need to measure the veterans that the leagues are hiring? How about disability? Do we look at the hiring of disabled persons? One area that I think is really critical is looking at third parties that do work for the professional sports leagues. It's a huge business in the United States. All these leagues hire law firms, accounting firms, audit firms, coaching search firms, executive search firms. Should we drill down to that level in these reports? If you're saying that the leagues must hire, if the leagues would like the teams to hire African American coaches, and every team in the world hires a coaching search firm, especially at the college level, where coaching search firms are a cottage industry, then maybe we need to start looking at the composition of the search firms that do these searches. The leagues hire a lot of consulting firms, so maybe we need to drill down on looking at that for Tides to stay relevant in the next decade or the next 2 decades. So that's kind of a discussion about the Tides reports in terms of how did they start? What were some of the initiatives that really kept them going? The mechanisms for actually how the Tides reports work, and then what the future of the Tides reports looks like. So I am more than willing to ask questions. I'll answer questions. I'll also ask questions of you. I mean, we're open to any ideas on what you think might keep these reports relevant. I should say that we reached out, or I think the FA, which is the governing body of English football or soccer, they reached out to us before COVID and asked the viability of doing a report for the European leagues. COVID hurt that, but what really hurt it was when the Super League, remember the Super League that was going to get formed, that kind of repositioned their thinking on things they have to worry about. But maybe the next step is moving into Europe, South America, Asia, and to those professional sports leagues as well. We've had discussions over the years, but we have not ever done a report for a non-North American sports property. So that will conclude my talk, and let's have a discussion. I can answer any questions you would like, or I can try to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you for giving me a platform. I'm always thankful anytime somebody asks me to discuss my academic research and an entity like the Tides reports. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah, Adrian, that was really interesting. I think the best way to manage the questions is if anyone wants to speak to use the hands motion or the hand emoji or to put it into the chat, and we can discuss via that way. Yeah, so Roshni has her hand up. Roshni, you have a question?
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Joining from South Africa, I'm particularly intrigued by how the implementation of this report over the years has supported or influenced true transformation around the culture within, for example, NFL. Have you seen the shift, for example? And then taking it into other regions, what is the broader purpose around this report and how it could potentially influence the future of sport? Thank you.
So let me take the first part of the question, the NFL. So how do you measure the effects of the Tides reports? That's the question we always ask ourselves. I'm not sure we've ever come up with a good metric to measure the Tides reports, because you really can't separate the Tides reports from the constant media attention that any kind of race and gender initiatives have on the sports leagues. But if you were to talk to the commissioner, the deputy commissioner, the senior executives of the leagues, they would tell you and have told us that the Tides reports are a huge part of their change initiatives. If only because we provide data, right? We take the data that the leagues give us and we aggregate it and we come up with a scorecard. So it's our way of saying, here's how good you're doing. Now, how does that, how much credit can we take for all the initiatives that have happened in the NFL? I don't know. At some point, the league executives have to embrace it, and they certainly have. All you have to do is look at some of the initiatives the NFL has put together. And I should say that in the Tides reports, we include a page in the reports for any specific initiative designed to increase race and gender hiring. For instance, I gave you the example of the Rooney report in the NFL. That's always listed among all the other initiatives in the report. So how much of that is Tides related? I don't know. I don't know if we can put a percent on it, but if you talk to the leagues, you talk to the executives of the leagues, they will tell you that it is a part of the process. It is an important part of the process, and it's a way to keep the leagues honest. And like I said, it gets a lot of media attention. Now, the second part of your question, if we're trying to expand Tides, and before we've never really we've had conversations with some of the soccer with the FA, but we've never really tried to expand Tides overseas, mainly because we have enough to handle. We do 14 to 16 a year in the United States, and we're limited by the fact that we're really an academic institution. This is just an initiative we do. So how would other leagues benefit from it? Well, I think from a diversity perspective, they would benefit enormously from it. I think that all you have to do is look at the growth in the U.S. professional sports leagues in terms of their race and gender hiring. And I think that goes along with the popularity of the sports leagues as well. I mean, it's there's a lot of data on being inclusive, and that's really where I think the leagues would benefit. The overseas leagues would benefit. So I think hopefully, Roshni, I answered your question at least as best as I could.
Thanks very much. Appreciated.
Adrien, I actually have a question because I was quite struck by the amount of press that these reports get, and obviously you're talking about some of the biggest media publications, not just in America and in the world. And I'm thinking with my, I suppose, kind of interest in online abuse in sports, and obviously that's kind of the key theme of this seminar series, that these types of reports are probably likely to provoke quite a reaction from the public, both positive and negative. And I'm wondering if you've noticed much of a change over time in terms of the kind of online discussion and discourse around these types of reports.
Yeah. So since this is an online abuse platform, let's kind of talk about that. When I took the job here 2 years ago, I knew who Richard Lapchick was. He was kind of an icon in sport management and social justice. He was an activist, had a worldwide reputation. The the first fall I was here in November, the Vatican called and asked him to fly to Rome to speak with the Pope about race and gender hiring in professional sports. The Pope had an interest in using sports as a vehicle for social change. So Dr. Lapchick was a huge part of the success of these reports. He had also seen, he had started in the 1960s. He had seen some of the change in the online vitriol that he had received. And when he handed the reports to me 2 years ago and said, look, I'm going to entrust that you're going to keep this going, he said, you're going to get a lot of publicity. I was sort of used to that when I was at the University of Tulsa. I would speak to the Tulsa World, which was the local paper. So I'd been quoted in the press plenty of times. He said, no. You're going to get a lot of publicity from all the big worldwide, all the big US media companies, which are now really worldwide media companies. I didn't really understand what he meant by that until it happened. He also told me, and he warned me, he said, you're going to get a lot of hate as well. You're not going to be, you'll be beloved by some people for continuing to do important work, but not by everybody. And all you had to do the first report I oversaw, if I remember right, was the NFL report, which of all the leagues gets the most publicity. And I remember going through the comments of, I think it was, it was one of the media outlets, and I was reading the comments underneath the article where they just, racist comments, what's this guy doing? I mean, it was as vitriolic as you could think. So the battle goes on. You better have thick skin if you're going to be the director of the Tides reports. But yeah, the online abuse in terms of what we as a department and when the DeVos program get, not everybody's going to love you. The state of Florida, if anybody pays attention to the politics in the United States, the state of Florida came out with a rule that said that no public institution, and the University of Central Florida is a public institution, no public institution can use the word diversity or use diversity in any part of their academic teachings. Well, the Tides Reports is nothing but a diversity report. And the legislature made us come up with an Excel spreadsheet of every time the word diversity was used in a classroom, in the name of a course, in any initiative we did. And this was kind of humorous. And at the University of Central Florida, I think 36% of the times the word diversity was used was in conjunction with one thing, and that was the Tides Reports. So again, not everybody loves what we do. It's important work, but it can get into the political arena pretty quick. And in the United States these days, that tends to be what you want to stay out of. We've done our best. What we did was we took the Tides reports. The actual state law said that no state money could go to it. So we took the Tides reports and all the GAs that are associated with it, and we moved it under private money, meaning donations that have come into the program. So no state money is used in these reports whatsoever. But when it came out, when this first happened, you can bet the online abuse was pretty great. So, but what we don't get into is the online abuse of the athletes, right? I mean, it stands to reason that race and gender is it's a politicized subject in the United States, especially when you talk about professional sports athletes that make a lot of money. All you have to do is look up any article and read the comments below to get a feel for it.
Yeah, I'm even just thinking of like within your report. Obviously, I don't know the kind of minute details, but a part of the recruitment process, is that they have a duty to their employees, these organizations, the NFL, NBA, what have you. So if they're taking steps to hire individuals from minority groups, they must understand that that's going to attract potential abuse. And is it possible for them, or are they already graded on how they actually, I suppose, look after hires from minority groups in circumstances like that when they are likely to experience, say, online abuse or kind of, when there's media attention around it? Like, say, especially imagine, say, for example, if an NFL team hired a woman as a head coach right now, like the discourse that would likely come from that, if you understand what I'm getting at with my question there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just look at the last 5 years or 10 years, the last decade in professional sports in the university in the United States. We've been through COVID, and the way COVID happened in the United States was the NBA players said we're not going to play.
Mm.
So the NBA had to move their whole league down to Orlando, where University of Central Florida is located, and they had to play in what they called a bubble. And you can bet that a lot of, in the United States, if you want to get white people charged up, just give African Americans leverage over them, right? The NBA athletes said we're just not going to play unless this is a safe environment to play at. That didn't go over well with a lot of the public. The United States has come a long way in terms of white people's acceptance of this. I'm not meaning to apply everybody white as racism. They're not. Plenty of people support the Times reports. Look at Colin Kaepernick, who was the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, when he took a knee before an NFL game. That was the vitriol around Colin Kaepernick was on a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 10, right? So there's been a lot of times where, like I always tell people, anytime the players on the field look different than the people in the stands, you're going to always have issues like this, right? So the race issue is not going away anytime soon in the United States, but we do keep making headway. The leagues have almost all the leagues have initiatives for diversity hiring. And I'm sure that did not go over well with a lot of the fans of the NFL. I know that they were furious about the whole Colin Kaepernick thing, but the league held pretty strong. The NBA has always held strong. The NBA has always been a player-dominated league. The commissioners have always really supported the NBA. The NBA came up with the WNBA. So you want to talk about supporting, gender hiring? Just look at how that league, the WNBA, started. But I think the leagues do protect their employees. I think the leagues they do whatever they can. But anytime you're in this country in this point in time, any kind of race and gender issues are going to get politicized.
Does anyone else have any questions or raise their hands or put them into the chat? Yeah, Roshni, again, you have your hand up.
Quick one. Thank you, Gary. Adrien, just following, circling back to my second part of the question is that when one looks at D&I in South Africa, I mean, this racism and transformation has been on the agenda for a good 30 years, and we're still working through it. Kind of culture, context, and the language of how people engage with each other has a lot to do with how organically this becomes embedded as part of the sporting culture, or whether that becomes a permanent challenge. And we're still battling with getting a kind of meritocracy versus ensuring that we're ticking the right boxes in terms of getting the representation on our leadership structures and also on the field. And you look at the different types of sports in South Africa, you see that in some instances it's worked really well. In some instances it continues. And at the official level and at the leadership level, certainly at the referee level, one does see continued onslaught and abuse lashed out against females, for example, and sometimes people of color if things don't quite go right. If it goes right, it goes the other way around. My question, Adrien, is would there be an appetite to incorporate the online abuse view into the work you do? Because I'd be particularly interested in hearing that.
So, yes, I mean, again, I sort of ended my talk by saying that we are open to any kind of initiatives that people think will keep Tides relevant. The online abuse is certainly, that's an issue that's not going anywhere. Just to update you, we have hired someone to come in. We have hired a full-time faculty member whose jobs it'll solely be is to oversee the Tides reports, and then I'll oversee this hire. He was a graduate assistant in our program when he was getting his master's degree. He went on to get a PhD. He's been at NYU for the last 7 years. We've hired him to oversee the Tides reports. And I've given him a charge as soon as you come in, you're to meet with all the leagues, you're to meet with as many people as possible to find out what is the next, like I said, what's Tides 3.0. Maybe online abuse is in that. If you think it's relevant, I would ask you, how would you measure it? What were some of the metrics you would put on it? How could we collect data on it? But it's a great topic to discuss. I know Theo's done a lot of work with Twitter. I mean, Roshni, I think it's excellent. And I ask you to if you'll send me a private email, furthering your thoughts on that. I think it's certainly something that we need to look at. If we can figure out a way to sort of capture the data to tell a good story, then we're certainly open to anything.
Sure, with Gary's permission, we'll do that, Adrien.
I don't need my permission. I think it's a really interesting point. I think there's a lot in there actually on the online abuse aspect. Sorry, Natalie, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Natalie. I'm from Honda FIA Mexico. We are the FIA member, the sporting authority in Mexico. It's very interesting discussion indeed, and thank you for taking the time to explain to us the Tides methods and analysis. Very insightful. Regarding the discussion that's going on, I was very interesting also how the Tides research is linked with online abuse researches. I guess it would be very interesting also to know if within the efforts that has been made in the leagues and everything, there is some effects in the online activities and the overall perception on diversity and yes, diversity issues and so on and so on. And I'm thinking, for example, also if you do those kind of research also on a particular, I don't know, particular events. I'm thinking, for example, now in Europe, there was in France, for example, in the soccer industry, an issue regarding some players that didn't want to wear the anti-homophobic logos, for example. I don't know if, for example, Tides would do some research around a particular events in NFL, like this kind of events, and see what happened online and what influence has this kind of events on the online activity. I don't know. It's just a overall question. I don't want to take too much time, but I was curious if you included this kind of work into your research.
When we do the Tides reports, we aggregate the data, we come up with the data. We always give one page for certain initiatives the leagues do, but we also have another page where we can address certain things. But that's just one page, and it's that's kind of anecdotal data, I guess is what I'm saying. Where I can say, I don't know, when we the NBA, we did the whole COVID thing. Here's kind of what's happened during COVID. So the better way to look at it is how can we take the online abuse and make it part of the actual data that the leagues are measured on. That's a challenge that I would ask you guys to help me think through.
Yeah, I think Adrien, it's probably worth bringing in Theo on that right now, because we've been doing work on audits for organizations around these kind of safeguards. I think he might have some interesting thoughts on it.
Okay.
You're muted.
Yeah, I got muted. Oh my God. So I think Natalie raises a very good question. So, well, obviously myself and Gary have been working on the tackling online football, tackling hate in online football, but also with the FIA Unite Against Online Abuse project. So we've actually done that. So we've actually analysed the very tournament that you're talking about, Natalie. So so I think that the online abuse area is a much more complicated area in one sense, because I know myself and Adrien have talked about this before, is that when you're dealing with hiring, it's a very clear cut, although it obviously is progressing slower than one anticipated over time. The difficulty with online abuse is it's a massive heterogeneous group of people perpetrating online abuse, and it ranges from hate speech, which is a crime, all the way through to offensive language. So it's very difficult. So, and even in Europe, legally, it means different things. However, I think that there's a couple of different things. I think the stuff that we're doing at the moment with the FIA is kind of interesting, because we're kind of trying to say, well, it's much bigger than hate speech. So at this stage, I think we're looking at 8 to 10 different types of online abuse. And then it's targeted at a wide range of stakeholders. I know Adrien's worked in the industry, so I'm sure has encountered this in his role in management and his role, as a researcher. But, it targets athletes, it targets coaches, owners, managers, journalists. There's a whole variety of people targeted. I think in the context of online abuse and social media, we're getting to a point of quite a lot of sophistication in terms of general trends, Natalie. So we can say, we can look at these tournaments and we can say, there's relatively speaking, there is this amount of volume of offensive speech or activity or online abuse. But in the context of wider kind of things, one of the things is people face a lot of online abuse through direct messages. So no one sees it except for the person getting the abuse. And often that is, that might not be managed by a professional athlete, that could be managed by someone else. The second thing is, in some instances, the athlete is not aware, or the individual being targeted isn't aware of the online abuse. They've just made a decision that they're not looking at the social media, or they're not looking at something. I think the issue is where it crosses over into the non-sporting life. So, doxing, or people turning up at other people's houses, or surveillance. Gary's doing some interesting research at the moment on the role that gambling plays in terms of online abuse targeted at individual athletes or coaches, where they're making a decision, someone loses money, and then they decide that that's the trigger for online abuse. And so the other thing I would say, it's a moving feast in one sense, in that TikTok, encrypted messaging, Telegram, even WhatsApp are now somewhat opaque areas where people participate in online abuse in a different kind of way. And so so I think that's a major challenge. I mean, I think what's very interesting about what the Tides report does is, like, it acts as a kind of an audit framework. Adrien talked about this ongoing. That idea of giving the organization a tool to benchmark themselves, to have a conversation with people and say, let's have this conversation. Here's a report. We can stimulate some conversation with stakeholders. Hey, sometimes we're not doing as bad as we think. Sometimes we're not doing as good as we think. But here's where we're at. And I think Aaron will probably give out to me now for saying this, but I think in the coming weeks, I think you'll find that the FIA is also looking towards a similar type of framework for auditing how organizations are ready in terms of handling online abuse. And I think it's a very complex space. So Adrien is lucky because he's gone to a place where they say, hey, we have years of rolling this out and we understand the dynamics, and the measurements that Adrien's working on, it's very hard to explain to non-researchers, but even just validating that they're the right things to ask, that takes years of rolling out a tool to make sure that everybody understands the same language and stuff like that. So I think myself and Gary's first attempt at that, I don't know, Gary, what was it? It's 135 different statements to assess whether people are ready to deal with different ideas of online abuse. And even then, we're not even sure that captures everything we want to capture. That's a very long audit to ask someone to do. So I think that I'm hoping to learn from Adrien, because they've had this experience. I also think and again, Adrien alluded to this, a key part of the Tides thing is the ability to engage with the media and to translate fairly complex research into very digestible takeaways for both the sports organizations and the public. I think that's it's a very important skill in the context of this. Like obviously myself and Gary are lucky that we work with the FIA, but most sports researchers or most researchers don't necessarily have that ability. So I think that that's a very important success factor in Tides. I don't know, Adrien, is that a fair comment?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But very well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that translating the research into the digestible communication piece.
I think that having that space to write the piece and say something like ESPN, as you said, Adrien, is really good. That it's not, the research is not kind of mistranslated, for kind of headlines and engagements, that the actual I suppose the detail behind it and the nuance behind it, you have a chance to communicate. Anyway, I'm conscious
we can't even talk about the words that we research in public, so it's kind of it doesn't matter what language is. Online abuse is offensive, so it's very difficult to even talk to the media and give them examples. So I think, but as I said, we're looking to learn from Adrien on this one. Sorry, Gary.
No, I'd say I will have to start making these sessions a little longer, because the conversations always end up being really interesting. I'm conscious of time, because I've taken up too much of Adrien's time as well too, who's been so generous to come and talk to us this afternoon or morning for you, Adrien. Again, thanks to the FIA and the UAOA, United Against Online Abuse Coalition, for supporting these webinars. Look out again, it's going to be essentially the third week, and the third week of every month we'll have a speaker, and we have speakers lined up for the rest of the summer. So I'll be emailing all who registered here, and please share details of them of these sessions to anyone you think who might be interested. So enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and thanks very much, everyone, for coming and for your insightful comments. And again, to Adrien, thanks so much, and keep up the great work with Tides. It's absolutely brilliant, I suppose, legacy of work that's going on there. It's really interesting to see what Tides 3.0 looks like. Also, no, Adrien left his email in the chat there if anybody wants to has any comments or questions that they want to further investigate with Adrien. Sorry, Adrien, taking up more of your time.
No, thank you so much for having me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.